this would be Kagero, right? This looks like Kagero. I think it's just okay.
Other deck is Kagero, same idea, very gimmicky, right? Just the deck it's Kagero right now is just not very good. All your decks are meme.
Kagero, I don't think Kagero will top. I actually think this deck is extremely fair.
Kagero, good luck in esports. This deck is ass, man.
Throughout Kagero's history, it has always been revered as a meta clan. In almost every single meta, there was a strong Kagero deck that was at worst a rogue pick. However, over the past 2 years, Kagero has fallen from the heights it was to the worst it's ever been. What happened? To fully understand Kagero's downfall, we must first take a look at the clan's history in order to see why it was strong in the first place. Kagero was one of the first clans to get a full set of support. During the early days of the game, you could clan mix. A lot of incomplete clans would mix Kagero because it had the strongest cards at a baseline. Dragonic Overlord being one of the few 11k grade 3s that could also hit at the opponent's rearguards multiple times a turn was very powerful because decks completely lacked ways to gain card advantage. This also made retiring really good, which Kagero had the most and cheapest ways to do that. It was pretty easily one of the strongest clans at the start outside of maybe Royal Paladin. BTO5 brought one of the most iconic cards in Vanguard's history in Dragonic Overlord the End. This completely warped the game with the ability to become a 13k base, and a restand effect that, if it hits, would generate card advantage while maintaining any triggers the card got. Because of the End's on-hit pressure and all of the retire effects the clan had already, this deck was really good at forcing the opponent to use more resources a turn than it was. Because of how strong the End, Tsukuyomi, and Majesty Lord Blaster were, set 4 and 5 were delayed a whole year from its English release, and set 6 and 7 were pushed forward to give other decks time to be fleshed out. In BT11, we were introduced to the Seal Dragon's archetype, which didn't end up being that good. But we also got Kagero's first break ride with Dauntless Drive Dragon. Dauntless gave a great restand ability to any grade 3 that rode on top of it. When combined with the End, it could end up swinging 3 times in a turn. This development gave a higher ceiling for the deck, but at the cost of cross ride and having to build the deck around the limit break. If this combo got the 3 Vanguard swings though, it had a high chance of winning from there. Between BT12 and BT13, Kagero got its own extra booster set. This set introduced a new archetype in Nouvelle Vague, one of the first grade 4s in the game. Nouvelle had a board wipe, grade 0 guard restrict, base 13k power, and nullified damage triggers. A lot of decks could not handle the pure strength of this deck at the time. There were often 2 different grade 3s paired with it. First was with Dauntless Drive Dragon to provide Nouvelle the extra restand at 23k and being able to use that grade 0 guard restrict multiple times in a turn. This forced the opponent to have multiple perfect guards in order to deal with this turn. The other variant was with Cruel Dragon, which also came out in the set. Cruel Dragon was able to ride skip to grade 3 a turn early, which then allowed the deck to go into Nouvelle turn 3. Being at a 13k base this fast made this deck incredibly tanky and played like how BTO5 the End played, but a turn sooner. Nouvelle instantly became a complete menace to the game that Conroe got banned as a starting Vanguard because of how consistent it turned the deck with Nouvelle Roman finding any grade 3 from the deck. In BT15, we got Dragonic Overlord the Rebirth with a new Dragonic Overlord as a break ride. This deck came with additional support in Dragonic Burnout, which is very cheap cost to retire rearguards, and Eternal Bringer Griffin, which directly finds the break ride from the deck. Rebirth in the break ride brought a consistent 3 attacks to Kagero at the cost of locking its whole board. This deck was very solid because it was able to convert unoptimal board states into an additional Vanguard swing. The full combo would be 3 33k Vanguard swings, each with 2 drive checks. This was one of the strongest break ride turns at the time, but struggled a little bit on the turns that weren't the break ride turns. The deck was strong enough though to still do well and was often paired with other boss units from the past. In BT17, Kagero became one of the strongest Legion decks with Perdition Dragons. It had a way more consistent game plan on being able to retire rearguards through Menace Laser and Neoflame. It got 2 really powerful main grade 3s with Dragonic Overlord the Great attacking a rearguard for a restand, with on-hit pressure to retire another rearguard. But it also had Vortex Dragonic, which retired 2 rearguards and dealt a free damage while shutting down damage triggers. It also got power each time it retired something with other rearguards that did too. It had good counter charges through Maliko and Grom. It also had Calamity Tower Wyvern to draw a card, and also was able to Soul Blast out cards to Legion back in. This deck was extremely consistent and hit really solid numbers. In the G-era's first set, Kagero got support through Blademaster, which ended up not being that great at the time. But the big winner for Kagero was the release of Dragonic Overlord the Cross. The Cross was a full powerhouse that completely warped non-Perdition Dragon builds. It brought back the End as a Legion mate and made it way more consistent. When it Legions, it can add either the Cross or the End from the deck to its hand. And if the attack didn't hit, then the Cross would be able to discard a copy of itself to retire 2 rearguards. But if it did hit, then the End would be able to restand. This brought the deck to have an extremely threatening Vanguard swing that punishes any choice the opponent made, while also having a direct tutor for whichever Overlord you need. It also had access to a G-zone, with Muhammad and Root Flare being additional free ways to retire. The deck had an insane grind game and became one of, if not the best deck at the time. GBT07 brought Kagero 2 of the best G-Guards in the history of the game with Defeat Flare Dragon and Denial Griffin. These 2 G-Guards completely warped the game for Kagero by giving it the ability to retire rearguards during the opponent's turn. Right before this, the deck also got a Legend deck, which gave access to the Legend, a new Nahalem that was a minimum 16k beater, and Lizard General Conroe, which made every Overlord deck super consistent with a free countercharger. All of these together made the Cross way better at consistently finding Overlords it needs, and maintaining Counterblast. It gave the deck a way to high roll into multiple The End restands by being able to keep searching them out, and having a not once per turn on-swing countercharge too. When Set 11 released, it helped flesh out Kagero's G-Zone, with Ziegenberg giving a generic restander to every deck. In that set, Blademaster got a new form and a ton of new support. Koen gave the deck a way to refuel Stridefodder each turn. Imbudi gave the deck a good attacker that also draws a card. Nadell also gave the deck an easy countercharger that also hits for 11k. All this together made a more aggressive version of Kagero that utilizes empty boards to gain power and had multiple ways to retire rearguards easier. Blademaster was naturally gaining card advantage each turn from Koen, Imbudi, and Ziegenberg on an empty board. It also got Absalom as a new G-Guard, which helps the deck counteract against decks that don't call a lot of rearguards. We also got Inspiriel Dragon, which became a really powerful stand trigger for the deck, since it was able to cycle itself back into the deck, give 5k power to something, and then if you hit a stand trigger on Imbudi, then it gave the deck an additional draw. GBT13 Kagero brought in a new suite of Overlord rearguards, a new grade 3 that works with striding, and a new stride that dealt free damage and had a ton of drive checks. This deck very quickly became one of the best because of the raw numbers it had, consistent retiring effects, and the advantage engine it brought in. The Destiny fueled the costs of needing a new Overlord for the Purge to deal its damage, and had the versatility to retire rearguards or your own locked cards. The primary variant was in tandem with the Legend, which could find most pieces when you ride it and fulfilled its similar role to the Destiny. The other way was to build it with the End and the Cross. Because Grade 2 gaming was a primary way to play at the time, the End gave the deck a way to punish Grade 2 gaming decks by swinging at the rearguards and generating card advantage off the restand, or forcing the opponent to guard the Vanguard swing. This is the primary deck to bring to the 2017 World Championships because of its power output and consistency. V Premium's first set was Dragonic Waterfall. Out of the 4 clans in there, Kagero was the second best deck in V Premium because it could potentially blow out OTT by disregarding the protect markers and force them to use pieces to guard with. The clan got solid generic cards like Berserk Dragon and Ammo with it. On the premium side, it didn't really get much better. Berserk Dragon and Ammo were decent rearguards to add in, and it also had the potential of riding V Overlord on its grade 3 turn by giving it a force marker and more threatening turn. But overall, the deck was still pretty lackluster compared to what was out at the time. When the Great came out in V Premium, it became the best deck of the format. It had consistent pressure through the Great, being able to keep reviving Neoflame, and Neoflame boosting the power and potentially the crit of the Great. It had the ability to dig through its deck faster through ammo and Sibel Dragonoot. This deck was consistent in finding its overlords as well because of Dragon Full Armored Buster. This engine made the deck run smoothly and used the pressure from the Great to close out games. In Premium, it gave the deck a solid ride target over the original V Overlord because it could give you a rearguard before having the stride. Neoflame was able to make a crit easier as well because of Lizard General Conroe giving countercharge on attack. The clan also got Dumjeed Valor for its Premium Collection stride, which gave a stronger pressure turn for its first stride, but can also help close out games later on since it gains so much power. Right after the Great, we also got the End, which wasn't as good in V Premium. It had a steep costs and conditions that needed to be met, but it could be a solid finisher in the deck outside of the Great. In Premium, however, the End would completely warp Kagero up to present day. It legions with the Cross, and because the Cross is the card performing the drive checks, the End would restand multiple times and still have 2 drive checks each attack. Force markers also gave the power to all units in the circle, so any legion would get plus 20k power per force marker. But in this set, we were also introduced to Force 2, which gave the deck an additional way to have a high crit Vanguard without needing the sat crits for it. This gave the deck a crazy finisher. The primary issue with it, however, was it was really slow in a field of Ezel being insanely fast at the time. It was still a really solid rogue pick doing that format. VBT08 was the beginning of the constant power creep of V Premium, and it started with the reappearance of the Cross. The Cross sped up the deck immensely because it fixed the issues with the End and allowed it to be used on turn 3 as well. Combined with DCAT and Calamity Tower Wyvern, this deck had one of the strongest grade 3 turns in the format and was very consistent at getting there. Toid Cannon also came out, which helped the deck easily dig through the deck, since under the Cross, it would draw no matter your hand size and still be able to proc Elmo and Sibel. In Premium, the Cross gave the deck the strong turn 3 it was missing to get the Legion turn as threatening as possible. During this time, Premium was in one of the most degenerate formats in Vanguard's history, being the Big 6 meta. The meta decks were built to basically auto-win turn 3 with very little counterplay. It was a going first meta, and Overlord was a deck that could compete if it went first. This is because Denial Griffin and DeFlare can shut down a lot of these decks' loop game plans. And speaking of the Big 6, Kagero was actually part of this with Dragonic Blademaster Soen. Soen created a vision token that could drive check on rearguard. Now, Blademaster has had this before with the original V Blademaster, but it was always a turn 4 play and it didn't give power to the vision token. Soen made this gimmick come online a turn earlier, which sped up the degeneracy of the deck. When the vision token would check a stand trigger, then it would restand and be able to attack and drive check again. So the goal of the deck was to keep checking stand triggers and have almost unlimited attacks with this vision token. What are some key takeaways from this? What made Kagero strong during these first 10 years of the game's history? There are 4 key factors. Retiring. Historically, retiring rearguards was always a strong effect because it forces the opponent to lose card economy, while it did not. It makes opponents a bit more wary of how many rearguards they commit because they could lose a lot of them before it gets back to their turn. Consistency. Kagero has always been an extremely consistent deck because of its Vanguard Circle focus. It utilizes its rearguards to find their primary grade 3s, and Lizard Soldier Conroe can find those pieces to find your grade 3s as well. The clan was almost always the most consistent deck in the format because of all of the searchability and the lack of needing many pieces to do its game plan. Vanguard pressure. The Vanguard Circle is always the primary way to push for this deck. Most Vanguards demanded a ton of resources from the opponent to survive. Also, throughout Vanguard's history, there hasn't been a ton of defensive options, which made it a lot harder to deal with. G-Guards. Between Denial Griffin and DeFlare Dragon, Kagero had 2 of the best G-Guards in Vanguard history, being able to easily disrupt board states and ruin decks that heavily relied on their rearguards. In Kagero's history, these were typically the reasons why the deck was insanely strong. Between all of this, it made Kagero typically a control deck that constantly forces the opponent to use more resources than it was. It did this through retiring, restanding Vanguards, and needing to commit less cards to the board to have pressuring board states. That has been Kagero's identity, but things started changing from this point onwards. V-era was pretty okay for Kagero. It brought in some decent rearguards for its time, but with the end of V-era, it gave the clan way less main deck support, which it still needed to keep up. It didn't have a strong foundation of rearguards that would allow it to keep up in the future. With the loss of direct main deck support, the deck began to fall behind due to how Bushiroad gives support to premium now. With the Big 6 ban list, Overlord was looked to be one of the best decks in the upcoming format. It was a rogue pick during Big 6 meta, and now has one of the better write-ups in the format. What ended up happening though was the decks at the top became less reliant on specific rearguards, which made Denial Griffin and DeFlare worse. Players started discovering Rollock and putting them into a lot of decks. Then the biggest change was the introduction of Grade 3 heals being a really good defensive tool against these turn 3 decks. All these combined made Kagero not as strong as it looked like. Doing these clan collections, a lot of clans got new rearguards and strong new boss units. Kagero, however, got 6 grade 3 units. There were really only 2 notable ones. Lockkeeper was a very cool card that was introduced to Kagero's arsenal. It made a whole new type of disruption build. Because of the lack of good rearguards, however, the deck ended up not having a ton to work with. It needs draw power to call a board to increase Lockkeeper's ceiling and resource recovery, which Kagero started lacking with the change to V premium. Lockkeeper in a vacuum is a good card, but Kagero hasn't built up the card pool outside of Overlord to make it work. Rebirth is the other good card that came out of these clan collections. It kept the identity of being a triple attacking Vanguard with the potential of retiring rearguards and getting a force marker. For V Premium, Rebirth became a good finisher in the late game, but in Premium, it wasn't as good as the Legion. What it ended up doing in Premium though is create a new build where the deck plays a bunch of old self damages to get to 4 damage and have a stronger turn 3. This made the clan a lot more piece reliant, and it isn't that scary unless a crit is hit early on. It isn't necessarily better than the normal The End variant. The rest of the cards that came out of these sets were other gimmicky boss units and an okay grade 3 rearguard and Blazing Flare Dragon. Premium Collection 2022 was the first set of new G-Guards since the end of G-era, and gave each clan a new stride. Kagero got alright cards. Barricot is okay because it gives the lackluster rearguards in the clan additional power while also being very massive itself. It gains the drive check as well to help get some card advantage. Their G-Guard was a perfect guard if the opponent doesn't have a board. It is extremely niche in its application because typically decks have a board and Denial Griffin acts as a potential perfect guard as well. Every other clan got better G-Guards and better strides doing this set. The last couple of new rearguards Kagero got was from V promos. One of them being Dumjeed, which is a new sentinel that can be guarded from rearguard. The other one was a ride fixer that blows up a column on swing. These cards aren't bad in a vacuum, but in the context of Kagero, they did not really help anything that keeps the deck lacking. What was probably the nail in the coffin for Kagero was History Collection. Every deck going second now gets a free 20k shield they can use, which makes turn 3s for most decks not as scary. Kagero was especially hurt by this. Then from the erratas everything got, it warped almost every clan's identity and gave a ton of new tools to them. Kagero was the worst off out of every clan. Blademaster and Muhammad together just retired 2 rearguards. It doesn't generate extra attacks, doesn't draw cards, doesn't access disruption. It does almost nothing. The only thing it does is give an extra force marker, which only 2 other cards have done in the past. A lot of old cards also came back to the forefront for a lot of clans because of the faster access to Generation Break and using the old boss units. Blademaster's cards did not age nearly as well as most other clans. The main use case for it is Imbooty, which gains power and draws on swing for a CB. It also gives the clan faster access to Bellog for Denial-esque plays. Everything else though is extremely lackluster. Now that we're caught up to modern day, these are the issues that are plaguing Kagero right now. A lot of decks now have good advantage engines that give them options at most points in the game. Having retiring as a game plan isn't nearly as strong these days because of the amount of cards being seen and the lack of payoffs for it. Because of the loss of V Premium, the clan is no longer having a good toolbox of rearguards that gave various effects. Now most cards are not as good since they are tied to retiring rearguards, don't generate power, and don't often draw cards. Because of Kagero's identity being Vanguard focused throughout its lifetime, it has aged poorly with the increased draw power and defensive options every other clan has gotten. A lot of the good Kagero rearguards are also Overlord centric, which makes the baseline for non-Overlord decks be a lot lower on card quality. Because of the extra defensive options, Kagero struggles to make much of a dent naturally without needing the high roll. They need all the big threatening pieces like Decat and Calamity Tower Wyvern, and then also hit critical triggers. Outside of Overlord, the power output of these decks are not nearly strong enough that sacking even helps. Drawing cards is the strongest mechanic in Vanguard. Card draw gives you options between different plays offensively and also more shield to survive attacks. Kagero was not given really any draw power throughout its history, which gives Kagero less chance to pivot game plans. A lot of Kagero's cards that say draw a card often remove themselves from the board, netting the clan a +0 in card economy. The increase in early game defensive options has made Kagero's really strong grade 3 turn into a joke. History collection strides are very often better than the cross turn as well. There are some good generic cards from V, but most of them were not at the same level needed to make Kagero good. A lot of decks rely on Athonic and the Chain Retire package to function, which naturally gives the deck less options since there is 0 draw power and not much shield between those. A lot of clans have a variety of options depending on the situation in their G-zone to use. Most clans have at least one card to get card advantage, a variety of finishers, and a variety of other cards for different niche situations. Kagero has a variety of restanders and retire effects. Not really any card that says, nah, I'd win, or a card that gained some sort of advantage. This lack of G-zone forces the deck to focus more on grade 3s, which naturally gives the deck less options throughout a game. All of these issues lead Kagero into one overarching theme. Kagero's identity throughout its existence has been to force the opponent to use more resources than it does. It did this through forcing more cards to guard from high pressure Vanguard swings and retiring rearguards. Because most decks did not generate a ton of advantage from most of the game's history, Kagero was gatekept from a lot of draw power because then it would have been too strong in most of these past metas. It could afford to use discarding as a cost because the opponent would generally lose more card economy than it paid. Now that decks have gotten more variety in the deck building, game plans, and better advantage engines, Kagero needs to have a better advantage engine to maintain this playstyle. The other thing is, since the Cross's release in V, Kagero has turned into an aggro deck instead of a control deck. It sacrifices cards to gain power. With the increase in defensive creep from Heal Guardians and the Guardian ticket, Overlord's aggro strategy is not good enough anymore, which was what Kagero started working towards. The end also makes it hard to play a more control style because you need to have 4 less cards in hand to restand. So instead of going for the Legion play turn 4, you are forced into a different play that is very often not nearly as good. Everything else outside of Overlord is not supported nearly enough to make a decent deck out of it. These are the reasons I believe Kagero has become the worst clan in the game. But if we are saying the issues, then there's gotta be solutions for Kagero. The problems with Kagero currently can't be fixed with one set. It's going to be taking time and good quality support over the course of a few sets. I believe these are the things Kagero needs not just to be strong, but to build a good foundation of cards for the future for whenever it's not a high tier deck. The first step is to give Kagero a way to draw cards. It lacks options in every situation it finds itself in because of this lack of draw engine. This clan could have a draw engine from Best Harvest, but it requires the opponent to leave a board, and it actively has anti-synergy with Denial Griffin and Defeat Flare Dragon. Until Kagero can draw more cards, it doesn't matter if it has better options if it can't get to them. Kagero needs to get a finisher. Any play outside of the cross legioning with the end is not nearly strong enough to try to close out a game currently. If Kagero can get a better finishing stride, then it will help out every single variant of Kagero in the long term. It also needs a stride it can go into when the game is not going well. Oftentimes it feels like Kagero needs everything to go correctly currently because of this lack of advantage engine and the lack of options between different turns. So if Kagero can get a stride that can help set up the clan for future turns, or just a stride that can generate card advantage, then it could raise the floor of this deck in an impactful way. Kagero lacks a game plan outside of the Vanguard. In every clan, there is at least one rearguard that when it hits the board, the opponent starts sweating. Kagero lacks any of those. The closest it has is Burnrise Dragon, but it is extremely overcosted. Because of retiring becoming worse, there should be cards that better rewards Kagero for doing it now. Have cards that can activate on the opponent's turn when rearguards are retired, and cards that can get stronger the more open rearguards the opponent has. Things like this could be really good in giving the clan a better reason to retire outside of it being the only option the clan has. Bearcat is an amazing example of how it should look. If Bushiroad can put that idea onto different rearguards, then it will really increase the power level of rearguards for this clan. Almost every rearguard in Kagero has one effect without trying to fulfill different roles within one card. Often the best cards in other clans have multiple effects that do different things or work off of each other. Giving rearguards the ability to retire and have a payoff with it, for example, would raise the rearguard quality. These solutions will make Kagero feel like GBT11 Kagero with Blademaster and Zegenberg. That type of playstyle, in my opinion, is the most sustainable for Kagero in the long term. It had really strong payoffs for empty circles, it had an advantage engine through Koen, Zegenberg, and Mbudi, and was able to hit solid numbers. These changes can also help Overlord out by giving it a better variety of options outside of just being forced into a Saki game plan. These issues could be solved within D-era as well, but they are usually super restricted and not generically good unless you really build towards it. At the moment though, we can be excited for Varga because in tandem with Dauntless, it can make a solid high combo attack deck. It won a premium event in Japan that was focused on making Varga as big as possible. We also have the new wave promos, which act as additional G-guards, which gives Kagero easier access to the really strong G-guards. Conroe and the Ride Fixer will be able to search them out, and the second effect should have a way to give the Vanguard plus 5k during the opponent's turn, which will be a big buff for a deck especially like Lawkeeper. There was also Drag Resonance, which I have made a deck profile on already. It gives Overlord a higher ceiling to help keep it up with the modern defensive options. Until these issues are fixed though, Kagero has a long journey ahead of itself before it can be regarded as a top clan again. Thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I put a ton of effort into this, a lot of hours. If you really did like this, and I'd like to do more stuff like this. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz, and I'll see you guys next one.